Your listeners want you to be organized, really organized, because they want to remember what you said and be able to walk away with something useful after you're done presenting. So let's talk about how to organize a presentation: intro, body, conclusion, and all the component parts. Coming up. Hello friends, my name is Alex Lyon, and Communication Coach is here to help you increase your impact to lead your teams to higher levels of excellence. Presentation skills are one of those gotta have leadership skills. Most leaders learn how to present well because it's part of their job. You're gonna be doing it all the time. And one of the best things you can do is come in with a really clear structure so that everybody can follow what you're saying. So we're gonna talk about the introduction, the body, and the conclusion, and all the parts that you need in those three parts. So the first section is your introduction. And this is only going to be about 5 to 10% of the time that you devote to your entire presentation. So let's just assume a 10-minute presentation. You're going to be doing your introduction for about a minute, not much longer. You want to keep this concise. Most of your time is going to come out in the body of the presentation. And your introduction needs to do a couple of important things. It needs to, first of all, follow what I call a funnel philosophy, where you start general and you narrow down to the specific issues that you're going to be talking about in your presentation that day. And your introduction, following that funnel, should have 5 main parts. First, you grab your audience's attention. Second, you establish why your topic is relevant for those particular listeners. Sometimes I call this the audience benefit statement. Third, you want to establish your personal credibility. You talk about your experience on this topic, talk about any research, and how you first became interested in it. And by the way, if you're being introduced before you speak, if it's one of those occasions, make sure that the person introducing you has all that information, and then you don't have to do it in your presentation in the introduction. You can just move forward. But that's the third part. If you're not introduced, you have to establish why you're the person they're talking about. What's your connection to the topic? Fourth, give your thesis statement. We call it a thesis statement in college and academic settings. In business, you might call it your main point or your central idea, your bottom line. And then the fifth part of your introduction is your brief preview statement. This is where you give a very concise roadmap of the main points to come. And it has to be concise. You don't want to get into any detail here because it's going to sound like you just started your presentation. So you want to pare it down to single words or really brief phrases with a little pause in between each of those main points. Let's say you have 3 main points. You say, I'm going to talk about 1, 2, 3. Talk about tents, backpacks, sleeping bags. Really concise. Now, a couple of other tips on your introduction. You want to avoid any kind of chatter beforehand. So let's say you're being introduced or you're just about to start. The first thing out of your mouth should be that attention grabber. You don't want to fill up with, oh, is my technology working? Oh, where did I put that stuff? Or, oh, yeah. And nothing that distracts from your attention getter. So as soon as the first thing out of your mouth, you start with that nice quotation, that crisp story that you were going to tell. You ask your rhetorical questions. You go right into the content. A little bit of showmanship here. You don't want to be messing around with anything that distracts you. You also don't want to reintroduce yourself. Most people are going to know who you are, and you don't want to say, like they said, my name is Alex Lyon. Skip over all that. If you need to introduce yourself or reintroduce yourself, you can always establish that in that third point in that funnel, which is where you're talking about your personal relevance to the topic. So you don't want to do any of these distracting things. You don't want to be long-winded. Really stick to your time there so you're only speaking for about a minute or about 10% of a 10-minute presentation. Let's now talk about the body. You just finished your introduction and now you're about to go into the body of the presentation. By the way, once you preview in your introduction the main points in the body of the presentation, you've got to go to your first main point. There should be no kind of filler in between your intro and your body. You have to go right to it. It's going to be very confusing for your listeners if you preview your main points and then you do anything other than go to that first main point. So the body of the presentation will take up about 85% of your time. Again, assuming a 10-minute presentation, you're going to be speaking for about 8 minutes or so in the body of that presentation. All the details come out here. So you have to have really clear main points in the body of a presentation. You have to. If you just ramble, people are not going to follow you very well. And also, you don't want to have 10 main points. I would say you need 3 or so main points. And you have to work hard sometimes to get it down to 3, to organize it in such a way that you end up with 3. But if you have more than that, people are going to have a hard time following you. You don't want to see a presentation with 10 main points, right? You're not going to remember anything. That's why phone numbers are grouped in 3s and 4s. They're much easier to remember than a long string of numbers. People remember things in chunks, and a chunk of 3 is just about right for a presentation. So you have to have clear main points. The next tip is you also want to signal that you're talking about those main points. So you want to say first, second, third when you get to those main points. A lot of times people say, oh, you really have to say that? Well, you certainly have to say something. I talked in another video about transition statements. Maybe your points spell out an acronym, a word, or something like that, and that's okay, you can do that, but otherwise, you want to say first, second, third, so that everybody's really clear on what you're saying. And if they lose track, then every time you remind them of that main point, they can get back on track. Other people say, well, do you have to say first, second, third? Can't you say something else like first, next, finally? Yes, you can. However, I have noticed that when people use first, next, finally, when they say the word finally, it sometimes makes people think you're on your conclusion. So there's a little bit of confusion there. So I just say first, second, third if I don't have a better way to say it. Now, in your body, this is where you're going to have to figure out how you organize your main points logically. You have to have some organizational pattern that makes sense to listeners. So if you're doing a persuasive presentation, you're going to do probably problem, solution, benefit. That's a classic 1, 2, 3 main point for a persuasive presentation. We're not going to unpack all of that right now. I'll make a separate video about that because it's a whole nother topic. But you could do that if it's persuasive. Another way to do it is chronological. Sometimes people call it sequential, where you have first step, second step, third step. Let's say you're teaching somebody how to do something and there are a few steps to it. That's just chronological. You start at the beginning, in the middle, and then the end. You might have spatial. This is not typical, but let's say you're talking about I used to live on the East Coast, and then I'm going to talk about when I lived on the West Coast, and then I'll talk about when I lived in the South. That's spatial arrangement. And sometimes topics make sense to do that way. Other times you might have, let's say you're talking about something medical, and a common way to do things in the medical world is talk about the causes, the symptoms, and the treatments. That's a natural way to think about illnesses and disease, and your physicians will often talk to you that way. You may not be realizing it, but that's what they have been doing. So there's lots of ways to organize, and if it doesn't fit any of the ways that we're highlighting here, you're going to have to go into what's called the topical style of organizing your main points. And I'll make a whole other video on this to dig down deeper into it because it's not the easiest thing to do. But in short, you have to look at your topic and figure out some logical way that makes sense for that particular topic. If it doesn't fit the chronological and so forth, you have to still figure out a way that people are going to listen to it and make sense. So let's say you're talking about camping. I love camping. I talk about it in a few different videos. You might talk about sleeping like in a tent. You might talk about sleeping bag and then the other cooking gear. So tent, bag, cooking gear. Or if you have a fourth main point, maybe you're talking about your backpack. So you have different types of gear that you're getting at, and that's a logical way to do it, but it's by the topic. And so every topic is going to be a little different. If you're talking about different styles of martial arts, you might talk about striking styles, which are more like punching and kicking. You might talk about ground fighting styles, which are like grappling and Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. You might talk about more acrobatic styles that involve flips and things. So those are different topics. They're not chronological, they're not problem, solution, benefit, they're just topics. So again, I'm going to make a whole nother video and I'll put all the links to all the videos I'm talking about in that section below so you can follow up. That's one of the ways you might have to do it. So you've got your main points organized in some logical way. The next thing you need is supporting details. So if 85% of your presentation is in the body, what are you going to be saying? This is where your examples come out, your data, your statistics, your stories, any kind of quotations or testimony that you're bringing in from people to build your case. This is where essentially the bulk of your presentation comes out. All the information-rich content that you want to share comes out in the body. Typically, you don't put a whole lot of new information in the intro And the conclusion, that's just setting up and finishing your presentation. And by the way, I have a whole nother section that drills down just into how to open and close a presentation. There's not a lot of new things happening. If 85% of the time you're talking about the body, then that's where most of your information comes out. And the last thing you need is clear transition statements between your main points. People have to know when you're done talking about A and you're moving on to B. You've got to, and the longer your presentation you get, the more important these are. Again, whole nother video in that section below, so check out those transition statements to add a little bit more style to it, but to make sure they're super clear. So that's how to talk through the body of a presentation. And speaking of transitions, let's transition to the conclusion. So you've done your introduction, you've done the body, and now you're into your conclusion. Your conclusion is the last 5, maybe 10% of your presentation. Do not drag out the conclusion. Once you are done, close it down. And here's how you do it. Here are the parts. You have to signal the end. You have to. You have to say in conclusion, in closing, in summary, something. I don't know why people don't want to say these things. Perhaps it sounds too typical, but you must come up with some clear way to tap those brake lights and let people know you're coming in for a landing. They want to know that you're ending, because if they missed it in the intro and they missed it in the body, now's their last chance to get it. It really puts people at ease when they know you're going to finish. So even though this is a short little phrase, in conclusion, it really stands out. In closing, that stands out. You want to tap the brake lights verbally for people. The next thing you want to do is reinforce your central idea, your thesis. Restate it in a concise way, really make it stand out. This is their last chance to hear it. You can also, if it makes sense for the body points of your presentation, recap those main points. Sometimes you don't need to, it's already pretty well captured in the thesis statement, but if your topic lends itself to this and would benefit from it, very briefly recap your main points, don't drag it out. The fourth part is a call to action. If you're doing a presentation that's persuasive in nature, this is really important. Not quite as important as an informative presentation, but it's really important in a persuasive presentation where you're calling people to action. You want them to sign that petition. You want them to donate money. You want them to commit to a certain action in the workplace. Whatever your call to action is, this is where it goes, and you have to be really clear and ask them directly for what you want them to do right there. They're probably not going to get a hint if you just beat around the bush. Now, the very last thing you do is sometimes called a clincher. That's what I call it. This is where you actually close the presentation. It's the last thing you do. And you want to echo the attention getter that you did, the attention grabber in the introduction. So if you started with a quotation, then you can bring that quotation back around and remind us of it and wrap it up. If you started with a story, maybe finish the story right there in that clincher. If you started with some illustration, bring that illustration back around. You want to add those nice bookends. I talk about this in a whole other video about how to open and close. Very psychologically satisfying for listeners to hear things come full circle. Now, once you're done with your clincher, you finish with that great quotation. Now you have to zip your mouth, smile, nod, and say thank you. Pause for 2 seconds, and then walk off. Time and time again, I have seen speakers do a great presentation, but they don't know how to end it. They do their conclusion, but they haven't practiced the actual moment where they close their mouth. So the universal signs for I'm done presenting, now it's time to clap, if that makes sense for your context, is you close your mouth, you say thank you, and you nod, wait 2 seconds, and you walk off, or you're all done. That's how you do it. So those are the 3 major sections in how to organize a presentation, your intro, body, conclusion. There are very important component parts in each of them on how they recommend you review these steps if you're putting together a presentation. If you have a 10-minute presentation, you need all of these. If you have a 1 or 2 minute presentation, you can slim it down and pare it down to the basics. So question of the day, what are your tips for organizing a presentation? I would love to hear your comments in that section below. Until then, thanks, God bless, and I hope your next presentation goes awesome.